The silence in feudal Japan held a weight, a cold promise that crept along your spine before the first ray of sun struggled through the thin paper walls. The dawn broke, pale and hesitant, a washed-out blue creeping across the sky like a timid brushstroke against weathered wood. Your breath fogged in the chill air, mingling with the old scent of earth and smoke that clung stubbornly to the cracked beams overhead. Beneath your knees, the faded tatami, coarse and unforgiving, pressed cold against skin already stiff from night's embrace. Outside, a distant temple bell tolled, its deep sonorous echo threading through the rustle of bamboo leaves swaying lazily in the morning breeze. The village lay shrouded in mist, gray, soft, and deceptive, casting a fragile calm over scattered wooden homes. But you knew better. The quiet hid the hard edges of your world. Hunger gnawing like a silent wolf, taxes heavier than your body bent in toil, the invisible threat of disease lurking like an uninvited guest at every breath. If today a dead phone battery makes us panic, imagine how it felt when your last scrap of firewood burned to ash in a world where warmth was life itself. There was no backup, no store on every corner. Only the endless day-to-day battle to keep the flickers of survival alive. Your day began as always, the creak of your worn wooden sandals punctuating the rhythm of routine. The well-awaited, distant and demanding. With a bucket heavier than your hopes, you walked through mud, smelling of decay and spring rain. The soil crumbled, reluctant, beneath your fingers as you tended fragile shoots of rice, their green sheen dulled by earth's cruelty. Every sharp movement, sharpening a dull sickle, weaving straw mats, felt like a quiet rebellion against the slow erasure of hope. Yet, amidst this austere existence, a small ember stirred. Around a communal fire the night before, faces blurred by smoke shared a fleeting warmth, a brief truce with the cold and hunger. Laughter, low and rare, floated like a whispered promise that not all was lost, but the morning held other plans. Suddenly the dog's incessant barking cut off mid-woof, a silence hanging sharper than any blade. Eyes met across narrow lanes, words unnecessary yet heavy. Something shifted, a tension threading through the village like a chill wind before a storm. The earth beneath your feet seemed to draw a slow breath, waiting. Hey, before Morpheus takes you for good, quickly check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the upcoming sleep stories. Take a moment to leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your interaction keeps this little calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The sudden hush that followed the dog's barking was heavier than the dawn fog, pressing against your chest like the cold slab of stone under your knees. The wind paused. The bamboo halted its lazy rustle, and even the birds seemed to hold their breath. The village, shrouded in its usual soft gray mist, now wore an edge, sharp and unsettling. Your fingers tightened around the wooden handle of the bucket, calloused and numb. Each step toward the well felt heavier, weighed down by that invisible tension weaving through the air. The mud beneath your feet sucked at your sandals, cold and sticky, refusing to release its grip easily. You glanced sideways at the houses, their slender paper walls barely shielding the secrets inside. Fragile as old parchment, ready to tear. The temple bell, which had marked the morning's gentle start, now seemed like a warning drum vibrating through your bones. Smoke from a few stubborn hearth fires mingled with the earth's damp breath, carrying the sharpness of burnt cedar and old leaves. It was a familiar smell, yet today it tasted like foreboding. Around you, shadowed shapes moved quietly. Neighbors exchanged narrow-eyed looks, hands clutching loose tools, whispers brushing like silk against the walls. No one spoke aloud, but the silence screamed that something was coming. Something iron and relentless enough to slice through months of quiet struggle. You fought to steady your breath, shallow from cold and worry. The rice stalks you had tended the day before swayed limply in the slight breeze, their once green tips now a dull gray, as if the earth was already pulling them back into itself. You wondered, not for the first time, how many more seasons like this your hands could endure. From the corner of your eye, a glimpse of movement, a figure slipping between the narrow lanes, hurried yet cautious. The oft-ignored sense of sweat and damp cloth seemed sharper, as if fear was an added spice. In the village stew, at the communal fire just last night, the masked laughter had briefly lifted, but now it felt like a fragile mask itself, ready to break apart under the weight of what was coming. You reached the well, its stones slick with moss and cold as forgotten dreams. The bucket's rope trembled in your grip, creaking softly as it plunged into the dark depths. The water that surfaced was murky and heavy, a shadowed mirror reflecting the gray light of morning and the silent dread circling overhead. As you hoisted the bucket, the muscles in your arms ached with the familiar strain, every movement a reminder of the grinding work that defined your life. This well was more than water. Today, it was the fragile spine of your village's survival, as precarious as the tiny shoots you cared for in the fields. Suddenly, a sharp, brittle crack pierced the quiet. The sound snapped through the air like a distant branch breaking underfoot. Heads lifted, eyes sharpened. Somewhere, a window shutter slammed against its frame, sending a staccato beat into the morning. Your heart faltered, that slow rhythm of the earth seeming to accelerate, upending the fragile calm. From the mist, a thread of smoke rose, but thinner and darker than the usual hearth fires. It lingered with a sinister patience before vanishing into the pale sky. You set the bucket down beside the well and drew a deep breath, fingers brushing cold moisture from your brow. The village was holding its own breath, the delicate balance between survival and collapse teetering on a knife's edge. Behind you, footsteps quickened, a hurried shuffle echoing through the narrow lane. Turning, you catch the glimpse of an elder's face, lined and worn, eyes sharp with the knowledge of too many winters survived and too many hardships endured. He speaks without words, a grab of your sleeve, a gesture toward the east, where smoke no longer dances but crawls like a dark stain. The sun, finally gathering courage above the horizon, casts broken light across the village, splintered and uneven like the hopes you cradled daily. In this fragile radiance, the weight of what lies ahead presses, thick and suffocating. A slow shudder moves through the crowd, quiet but resolute. The stork's cry from a distant tree pierces the silence, a lone reminder of life persevering amidst decay. Yet beneath that cry, beneath your feet, in the cool, unforgiving earth, something deeper stirs. Your mind races through half-remembered stories told in whispers by flickering firelight. Tales of raids just beyond the hills, of strangers carrying weapons like thunderclaps and shadows that swallow whole families. The world beyond this mist is no longer a distant threat. It edges closer, dragging with it the cold promise of fire and blood. You glance down at your hands, rough and scarred, the only weapons you know. The sickle from yesterday lies nearby, its blade dull but ready. Ready to carve more than just rice stalks if needed. A pulse of wind runs through the trees, carrying with it a faint cry. Or was it a warning? The village exhales, fragile and gathering its courage as it faces the dawn of a day that unraveled the thin thread between quiet survival and chaos. Something unseen yet palpable clenches the heart of the village, pulling tight like the rope of your water bucket. And just as the distant fluttering of village banners picks up, unsteady like the heartbeat of this fragile life, you know the silence has broken. From the depths of the encroaching mist, figures emerge. Not neighbors, not friends. A shadow falls across the well, dark as a shroud, as the first footsteps crack against the earth's brittle skin. And in that moment, the cold weight of dawn settles fully. No longer a question of if, but when. The shadow stretched long and unwelcome, pooling like ink over the grain of the wooden planks beneath your feet. Staring into the mist where the figures lurked, a silent threat unblinking amidst the cooling dawn, you felt the breath catch in your throat, tight as the rope on the well bucket just moments before. Your skin prickled with cold tension, each knot of fear woven deeper by the fading light. Has the village held its fragile stillness, teetering on the edge of something dark yet inevitable? The paper walls trembled faintly in the whispering wind, as if the homes themselves were bracing for impact. ready to close tight against the storm. A distant cough broke the hush, brittle and unsteady, chilling as the early frost that clings stubbornly to fallen leaves. Eyes flicked toward the source. An old man, bent and coughing past the point of breath, his face a map of winters survived. You recognize the weight behind those ragged gasps, a reminder that illness was a shadow no blade could cut short. But today, shadows carried a sharper edge. You could see it in the tight lines of your neighbors' faces, etched with a shared, unspoken dread. The village's slow pulse seemed about to falter, each heartbeat a fragile echo beneath the gathering threat. Your hands closed around the sickle by your side. The blade was dull, a whisper of metal worn soft by seasons of use, but it carried the unyielding history of survival. The green shoots you'd nurtured seemed fragile under your gaze, but more so was the breath of hope that still flickered within the village's collective chest. From the fog emerged a scent harsher than the usual mingling of earth and smoke, a metallic tang, sharp as the bitter cold that had seeped into your bones overnight. It rode the wind, swift and sure, announcing the footsteps that had disturbed the fragile peace. The figures now edged closer, their forms too bulky, too deliberate to be mere travelers or old friends passing through. Children peered from behind door frames, faces blinking wide-eyed through the paper-thin divide, their small hands pressed flat as if to hold back the coming storm. You couldn't blame them. Their silent fear was a reflection of your own, a fragile mirror to the growing rift in the morning's calm. The village elder reached your side, his hand cold as the stone well, gripping your shoulder with a steadiness born of years shaped by hardship. Without words, you felt the heft of his warning, the weight of decisions waiting like sharpened arrows. Holed up in the heart of the village, behind him the smell thickened, burnt cedar teased with the acrid sting of smoke that wasn't from the cooking fires. It was a scent you'd come to know too well, the bitter promise of flames that consumed not just wood, but homes and hopes alike. You stepped back from the well, the bucket still heavy at your feet. Somewhere nearby, the dogs had fallen silent again, as if the wasted sound had been drawn into the mist itself. The world beyond the village was thin now, stretched tight with the cold breath of conquest and loss. Your gaze swept the lanes, empty, save for shadows melting back into the creeping fog. The sun, now higher, burned weakly through the gray veil, its pale light failing to warm. The chill that wrapped everything in a cloak of unease. A sudden clatter shattered your thoughts. A stack of firewood toppled near the communal hearth, scattering with a bruised thud that echoed off the wooden walls. Heads snapped toward the noise, breath held tight, waiting for an answer the dawn refused to give. You could almost feel the moment stretching taut between heartbeats. a single fragile thread binding the village to its fading quiet. The rice stalks in the field swayed as if caught in a breathless pause, their once vibrant green now mottled and muted, a reflection of the village's own fading vitality. The elder gestured eastward, eyes narrowing beneath creased brows that had weathered more storms than you cared to count. From beyond the hills, the smoke was a thin, relentless thread. Wound, bleeding, slowly across the land. Your fingers brushed the sickle's handle, and in that small touch was the stirring of a resolve you thought long extinguished. This fragile life, balanced on such thin hope, now demanded more than quiet endurance. The village could no longer be a passive witness to the shadows creeping closer. A soft murmur rose among the gathered neighbors, a ripple through the silence, like the gentle shift of paper in a breeze. With it came a sliver of light, faces set with hardened determination, eyes bright despite the dawn's sorrow. They, like you, understood the unspoken truth. The silence was over. The first footsteps broke from the mist, measured, cruel, unyielding. They cut through the cold air like sharpened knives, the sound a steady drum against the brittle earth. You turned slowly, breath shallow, heart pounding a rhythm that matched the advancing step. The cold weight of dawn settled fully now, transforming from quiet threat to undeniable reckoning. The village itself seemed to lean in, waiting, bracing for the breach. And then, from the shifting gray of the mist, a voice rose. Not yours, not a whisper, but a steady, resolute call that shattered the morning's fragile shell. It was the promise of resistance, or the herald of what was to come. The mist thickened, swallowing the soft shapes of the village, as the shadows from the advancing figures grew bolder, sharp silhouettes arrayed against the trembling gray. The fragile quiet you'd clung to, not lines, shattered now, replaced by the ragged rhythm of distant footsteps, steady and unyielding, cutting through the damp morning air. Like a dull blade edging closer, your breath hitched as the elder's grip tightened on your shoulder, a silent anchor in a sea turning restless. Ahead, the once familiar paths twisted beneath an intangible threat, heavy as the sodden earth clinging to your sandals. The well stood behind you, its still waters reflecting a fractured sky, mirroring the shatter beneath your ribs. Between the trembling planks of the houses, flickers of movement caught your eye. Children pressed against fragile screens, faces pale pools of unspoken fear, clutching each other, as if their small hands could hold back the danger, creeping ever closer. Somewhere nearby, an old woman whispered prayers so soft they might have been the wind. The metallic scent rode the breeze again, harsher now, slicing through the usual aroma of damp wood and earth. There was no mistaking it, the tang of something forged for violence. You shifted closer to the sickle at your side, its worn handle cold and familiar, a dull promise against the unknown. Beyond the mist, the figures hesitated before crossing the invisible threshold into the village hearts. their shapes resolved into rough armor and faces obscured behind helmets. Strangers with intentions carved firm in muscle and metal. Their slow approach was a drumbeat of inevitable reckoning. A sudden gust stirred the bamboo above, the leaves rattling with a brittle urgency. The dogs had vanished, their barks silenced, like a snuffed candle flame. The village held its breath as the first wordless challenge flung itself into the air. Not cries, but a sound of gathering resolve, a pulse beneath the fear. From within the crowd, a woman stepped forward. Her stance was small but unyielding, eyes blazing with a fire that refused to be buried beneath the ash of despair. In her hands, a cracked wooden staff, worn smooth by years, yet sturdy enough to bear the weight of resistance. Her gaze met yours, a flicker of recognition passing between survival-worn souls. The elder nodded sharply, silent command passing like a secret between the two of you. Muscles tensed. The sickle felt heavier, laden now, not just with work, but with the cold steel of necessity. The rice fields beyond awaited tending, but today their green was shadowed by the threat pressing at the village's fragile borders. You swallowed the thick knot in your throat as the first enemy figure stepped fully into the clearing, boots sinking slightly into the softened earth. His eyes scanned the village, calculating and hard. The mist curled around him like a cloak, but it couldn't hide the sharp edge of anger that flickered beneath the surface. Around you, neighbors moved with a quiet, desperate grace, fingers tightening on tools, faces setting into expressions carved from long survival. The old stories whispered at firelight surfaced less as tales and more as warnings etched in the hardened lines of weathered faces. Suddenly, the woman with the staff raised it slowly, a silent challenge. The war drum of your heartbeat swelled in reply. Around her, a chorus of murmurs arose, soft but unbroken, threads of defiance woven through the morning fog. The village was no longer just waiting, pinioned between survival and surrender. Today, something inside it ignited. A distant crash echoed, a door flung open somewhere near the edge of the village. A startled cry stifled before it could take flight. The figures paused, calculating the flicker of resistance against their slow march of domination. The world beyond this mist was shifting, and in that pause lay a sliver of fragile hope. Your eyes locked onto the green shoots of rice in the field. Tender, pale, yet stubborn as the wills gathered here, the sickle pressed into your palm, the weight of all that was and all that might be, the promise etched in the cracked wood of the staff across the way, the quiet strength of a community fraying but unbroken. The elder's voice broke the fragile silence, low and steady, the first words spoken since dawn. Their weight settled over the crowd, making the mist seem to pause itself, as if even the morning waited breathless. No surrender today, not while a single hand could still grip a weapon, no matter how worn. Outside the village's fragile embrace, the shadows shifted, darkness curling tighter like a fist before the strike. And just as the sun lost one of its pale rays beneath the mounting gray, a figure stepped forward. Not a stranger, not an invader, but someone you never expected to see. Their eyes met yours, familiar, deadly calm. The silence unraveling, the cold dawn, the fragile village, everything condensed into a heartbeat suspended on thin air. Then the whisper spread through the crowd. It wasn't a prayer. It was a warning. The figure stepped fully into the village square, the thick fog curling around his boots like a shroud. Your eyes locked on him, a stranger, carved from shadow and quiet menace, his armor dull and scratched, reflecting none of the weak morning light that fought through the mist. His breath came steady, measured, a rhythm that seemed to echo hard truths you hadn't dared speak aloud. The woman with the staff stood beside you, planting her feet firmly, lips pressed in a thin line. Her gaze never wavered, sharp as the dull edge of your sickle, the tension in her fingers telling a story of patience worn thin. Around her, a handful of neighbors shifted restlessly, clutching tools and makeshift weapons borrowed from daily life, each object a silent vow of defiance. You felt the weight in your palm grow heavier, as though the worn wood of the sickle absorbed the crushing gravity settling over the village. The well behind you bubbled with muted echoes, its dark waters mirroring the fractures, spreading like cracks in old lacquer. Every breath you drew tasted of cold earth and the faint, bitter tang of smoke, drifting from the north, where the hills bled thin threads of black. Movement flickered at the edge of your vision, shadows melding with mist, while children crouched low behind the fragile paper walls, eyes wide, yet hauntingly quiet. Their faces, pale and strained, flickered through translucent screens like ghosts caught between safety and the unknown. The elder's hand pressed harder against your shoulder, a lifeline in the gathering tide of fear. His voice, when it came, was low, gravel and steel, breaking the silence that had blanketed the village since dawn. Words were few, but they carried the weight of colder winters and battles fought in mud and blood. You swallowed hard. The rice stalks you'd tended, once a fragile green beacon of hope against the hardships, now sighed under the weight of the gray dawn, their color leaking away like memories fading behind the mist. The sickle in your grip was no longer just a tool. It held the promise and peril of survival. The stranger's eyes scanned the village, a slow, predatory sweep that lingered longer than necessary. His gaze flicked to the cracked staff, then to your sickle, measuring resolve and hunger alike. The acrid metallic scent on the wind sharpened, wrapping itself around strained nerves like a cold chain, tightening inch by inch. A faint rustle broke the stillness, bamboo leaves trembling as the breeze stirred suddenly stronger, carrying with it whispers of something ancient and unyielding. The crowd tensed collectively, a breath held, a heartbeat suspended. The fire glow from last night seemed like a distant memory, the warmth receding as shadows lengthened. "Enough," whispered the elder, voice slicing through the taut silence. He stepped forward, his figure stooped but unbroken, a flicker of defiance flickering in his lined eyes. "This village will not fall so quietly, not without a fight." The woman with the staff nodded, raising it slowly in a silent vow, a beacon in the gray wash surrounding you. It shuddered slightly, like the last leaf clinging desperately to a winter tree. Around her, murmurs bloomed, soft, steady, woven from years of hardship and whispered courage. Your fingers curled tighter around the sickle. The blade bit faintly into your palm, a dull sting that jolted your senses. You looked once more at the fields beyond, patches of rice stubble, pale and brittle like old bones, reminding you of all that stood to be lost. The ground beneath your sandals held the scent of wet moss and old stone, brittle with cold and exhaustion. From the mist, more figures emerged, shuffling closer with deliberate steps. Their armor clanked quietly, masks hiding faces shaped by war and indifference. They were not just invaders. They carried the weight of years spent breaking will and spirit. The village swayed on the edge of silence and sound, a fragile thread guiding every breath, every stolen glance. The whistle of wind carried the faintest echo of a distant war drum, rolling in from beyond the hills, growing louder as each moment passed. You glanced at the elder, whose eyes gleamed with resolve sharpened by countless trials. Beside him, the woman tightened her grip on the staff, shoulders squared like a warrior bearing invisible scars. Across the crowd, hands gripped weapons, some born of necessity, others relics of forgotten days. Not much, but enough. Suddenly, the crisp crack of a snapped branch echoed sharply, distant yet impossibly close, slicing through the mist like a whisper of doom. The enemy shifted in place, faces obscured, but bodies taut, responding to the invisible signal. The last thin ray of sun, pale and trembling, slipped behind a cloud, casting the village into an unsettling gloom. You felt the cold settle deeper, seeping into your bones, yet burning your resolve sharper than any fire. Then, from the thickening fog, a slow, deliberate voice cut through the heavy air, clear, unyielding, breaking the fragile calm like a blade through silk. Your heart throbbed in time with its cadence, ancient and new all at once. The village exhaled collectively, A breath held too long, finally escaping into the cold. Faces hardened. The weight of what was to come settled like a cloak. Yet beneath it all, something flickered, fragile, fierce, and unbreakable. You look toward the approaching figures once more, your sickle poised, the sharp edge gleaming faintly in the dim light. Because now the silence had shattered, and in the shifting shadows a name was whispered like a curse on the wind, a name you never expected to hear again. The stranger's eyes traced the faint outlines of the village, lingering, briefly, on the cracked staff clutched by the woman at your side, then falling sharply onto your sickle. The morning light was pale, timid, but the cold in the air pressed firmly against your skin, carving a path beneath your ribs. You could feel it there, like the silent promise of a storm gathering just beyond the hills, waiting to rip through everything fragile. The elder's voice broke the fragile silence again, low but resolute. His words were like gravel rolling down a hill. No grand speeches, no calls to glory, just the blunt truth of survival. We hold this ground. Whatever comes, we stand. Around you, the villagers shifted closer, the sound of wooden sandals scraping softly against the earth, mingling with quiet breaths and the distant cry of a lone crow breaking overhead. Your eyes caught the subtle, nervous exchange among the younger men, some clutching pitchforks, others gripping sticks or even heavy stones. They weren't soldiers, just farmers, like you, but today their hands bore the weight of something sharper than sickness or hunger. A tense breath passed over the village as the first enemy figure stepped forward. The dark armor gleamed dully, chipped at the edges, as if marked by battles forgotten and lost alike. His helmet hid his features, but you sensed the cold calculation behind the slow, measured steps. The mist curled around him like a cloak, swallowing his shape in the morning haze. Your hand tightened around the sickle's worn handle. Each groove and splinter etched stories of days spent bent over fields and nights stolen in quiet desperation. But today, it might carry more than harvest. The faint metallic scent sharpened again on the wind. Smoke mingled with iron and something acrid, the smell of harsh orders and blood-bought ground. A sudden shift rattled the bamboo leaves above, the faintest ripple of wind stirring the sleeping shadows. The dogs, which had gone silent so long ago, were nowhere to be heard. The village held its breath. Even the temple bell seemed muffled, its deep toll swallowed by the pressing fog. The woman with the staff stepped forward, the wood smooth against her palm, trembling slightly as she lifted it in a silent vow. Her eyes swept across the captured gaze of the enemy, steady and unyielding, revealing a fire that flickered even in the gray dawn. You saw the unspoken message carried in the steadiness of her stance. No surrender, not today. From the corner of your eye, a child peeked from behind a screen, the paper thin and fragile as a whisper. Their wide eyes, filled with unspoken questions and fears, caught yours for a fleeting second. There was no place here for innocence, not anymore. The world you'd known was folding, edges curling like aged parchment, battered by the wet morning. The elder's rough hand fell on your shoulder again, a brief anchor amidst the swelling tide. He didn't need to say more. His gaze said it all. Whatever came next would burn the village's soul or forge it anew. The footsteps from the enemy shuffled with cold purpose. More figures emerged from the swirling mist, their heavy armor clinking softly together, sounds sharp like needles pricking the thick. Silence. They didn't rush. Their approach was patient, predatory, as if savoring the fear muffled beneath the breath of the village. You glanced at the rice stalks beyond, their pale green tips drooping like flags of fragile peace. The earth beneath your sandals was wet, clinging and cold, as if trying to hold the village in place. But you knew it wouldn't be long before the soil shuddered under heavy boots. A sudden crack snapped through the air, the sound of a thick branch breaking somewhere beyond the village limits. Every head turned sharply, breath hitching like a faltering flame. The enemy's masked form stiffened, eyes narrowing behind steel visors. The woman raised her staff again, this time more firmly, the rope bindings worn but steady. Her voice broke the tension, a single word, low and clear, slicing through the fog. It was neither a plea nor a threat. It was a summons. The villagers around you echoed, soft voices growing louder, a fragile anthem forged from whispered prayers and raw determination. Even your own breath steadied, fingers relaxing its death grip, just enough to feel the cool air against the blade's edge. In that sheer moment, sunlight broke through the clouds above, scattering a few hesitant rays that glanced off the mist like silver threads. For a heartbeat, the village seemed to glow faintly, a fragile pulse of light in a gray world growing heavy with shadow. But the figures beyond the mist did not falter. Their heavy boots finally struck the ground within the village's borders, steady and deliberate, marking the boundary line where safety ended and chaos began. The air was taut, stretched thin between the familiar and the unknown. Then the stranger, his gaze flicking once more to the two of you, to the village and beyond, spoke. A quiet, steady voice that carried over the gathering crowd. He spoke a name, a word that fell like a stone into the murmur of the morning, a name that twisted the knife of memory and dread alike, a name you had hoped was long buried beneath these misty hills. And with that, the fragile silence broke into a storm. The name fell between you and the stranger, like a shard of glass, catching the faint light and cutting through the mist-cloaked tension. A sudden stillness blossomed, as if the village itself held its breath, waiting for the next move in this silent game of shadows and steel. You felt your heart quicken, not from fear alone, but from the slow surge of something stubborn and fierce beneath your ribs. The elder's hand on your shoulder tightened, a wordless anchor pulling you back from the edge of despair. The stranger's eyes flicked to the cracked wooden staff in the woman's grip, then back to you and your sickle. A slow, dry smile touched his lips, a gesture fleeting and unreadable from the swirling gray. More shapes emerged, heavier now, their armor clinking faintly as they stepped forward, boots pressing into the soft earth with the insistence of winter frost creeping over stone. Behind them, the fog thinned, just enough to reveal the silhouette of a broken banner, a faded emblem half swallowed by dust and age. It dangled, limp. The symbol once proud, now a whispered ghost carried by a bitter wind. You swallowed hard, the dry earth beneath your fingers suddenly feeling colder, sharper. The rice stalks beyond the village, pale and trembling, seemed to bow as if acknowledging the weight pressing down on them. The woman tightened her grip on the staff, her knuckles blanched, not just from strain, but from the fierce resolve simmering beneath the quiet morning. Around you, neighbors shifted, every pair of eyes now fixed on the stranger whose name echoed like a curse in the mist. The elder stepped forward, voice low and steady, a rhythm shaped by years of lost battles and hard-won peace. "We know who you are," he said, his words carrying the weight of a history neither side could ignore. A ripple moved through the gathered villagers, a murmured thread of recognition that wove itself into the brittle air. Children huddled closer behind paper walls, their whispers a fragile shield against the nightmarish certainty settling over the village like a slowly tightening noose. The stranger's gaze never wavered from you and the woman with the staff. His voice broke the silence again, this time rougher, colder. "We have come to claim what was promised long ago." His words hung like smoke, pungent and choking. The scent of burnt cedar mixed uneasily with the metallic tang that clung to the strangers like armor. The wind caught the frail edge of the broken banner and pulled it taut for a fleeting moment. One final gasp before it fell limp again. Your fingers brushed the sickle's handle, the worn wood biting faintly into your skin like a warning. The ground beneath your sandals felt restless, small stones shifting as if the earth itself wished to recoil. Around you, neighbors tightened their circle, hands wrapped around sharpened tools and makeshift weapons fashioned from the implements of daily life. The soft, steady drum of resolve began to pulse faintly, a heartbeat growing louder in the quiet dawn. A sudden, bitter gust swept through the village, stirring dust and dead leaves. The bamboo whispered urgently above, their brittle voices weaving with the low murmur of the crowd. Somewhere deep inside, a small fire flickered, fragile but unyielding. The woman raised her staff again, her minimal movement slicing through the thickening tension. Her eyes locked onto the strangers, two flames in the gray. The village. Elder's gaze followed, steel hard and unwavering. He spoke again, slower this time. No more silence. A collective breath escaped the crowd, a fragile outward pulse in the suffocating stillness. The stranger soldiers shifted, boots scraping on dirt, the clink of armor growing louder, like the slow tolling of a bell marking a reckoning. A child's faint cry brushed the edge of your consciousness, a sharp contrast to the rising chorus of determined whispers. Faces set with fierce lines turned toward the creaking of a heavy wooden gate, swinging open with a groan that echoed like an ancient warning. In that fractured moment, the first slivers of pale sun pierced the mist, a hesitant, fragile light that seemed to hold its breath alongside you. But the glow barely reached the shadow where the stranger stood. His eyes narrowing as the distance between peace and chaos shrank to a heartbeat. Suddenly, the woman with the staff stepped forward, voice steady but low, a sound that cut through the cold like a blade through silk. The time has come. Her words scattered ash-like through the air, settling over the village with a promise. Not of surrender, nor of defeat, but of inevitable resistance. You felt the sickle in your hand grow heavier, not just with the weight of the wood, but with the fierce, trembling hope nested deep inside your chest. The stranger's mouth twitched once more, almost a smile, before he turned slowly, nodding toward the assembled soldiers. They advanced then, carving a path through the mist, their steps setting the fragile earth shaking beneath the village's feet. And as the sun finally broke free from the clouds, scattering trembling light across the battered faces around you, a figure slipped silently from the shadowed edge of the crowd, a ghost from a past you thought forever buried. Their gaze met yours, sharp and cold as the dawn's first frost. A single whisper escaped the stirring wind, a warning carried on the breath of the coming storm. You were not meant to survive this day. The air thickened, hanging heavy like a damp cloth pressed tight over your face. The name spoken by the stranger curled in the mist, settling between you and the village like a weighty stone sinking slow. It was not just a word. It was a wound reopening, a shadow pulling the past through the fragile present. Your fingers clenched tighter around the sickle's handle, wood biting into skin as if to remind you this was no longer about harvest, but survival. The woman's staff beside you trembled faintly, but her eyes blazed with a steady fire, a flame undimmed by the creeping gray that swallowed the village. The elder's grip remained a cold anchor, steadying you against the surge of memories that threatened to sweep you under. Around you, the village held its breath, the usual morning chorus stilled by the gravity descending like a slow fog. The children's wide eyes peered through paper-thin screens, reflections of innocence fading beneath the weight of names and shadows older than the hills. Somewhere a bird called once, its cry a sharp, solitary note that pierced the heavy silence and then was gone. The stranger stepped forward, his boots pressing into the soft earth where the rice stalks bent low, fragile and pale. The mist curled around his armor, dull and scratched like old iron left out to rot. His voice, when next it cut the stillness, was low and relentless. We come for what was never forgotten. Your breath caught. The words were a breach, an open wound in a quiet world that had fought so hard to keep its edges intact. Behind the stranger, the other figures shifted forward, shadows gathering with purpose, carrying the scent of smoke and cold steel that made your skin crawl. A gust stirred suddenly, scattering dry leaves across the path, rattling bamboo with brittle impatience. The soft murmurs among your neighbors stretched thin and vanished, swallowed by the pressing dread. Tools clenched tightly, hands trembling not with weakness, but a desperate resolve. The sickle in your hand seemed to grow heavier with every heartbeat, every second tethering you more tightly to a fate once distant. You glanced toward the fields, where the pale shoots swayed like thin flags in a languid breeze, wilting under the inescapable fact that this day might be lost before the sun claimed the sky. The elder's voice broke through your thoughts, hoarse but unwavering. Not today, not here. The woman with the staff lifted it higher now, the cracked wood catching the last scattered light like a beacon. Her stance firmed, shoulders squared against the oppressive gray. Around her, hands gripped makeshift weapons born of quiet desperation, pitchforks, stones, and worn blades, each carrying the weight of hope as fragile as the morning mist. Suddenly, from the edge of the village, the soft creak of a centuries-old gate groaned open, its protest a mournful song. The crowd shifted as more figures emerged, faces shadowed by helmets that bore the scars of wars not yet forgotten. Their footsteps settled like iron anchors on the soil, a steady rhythm that hammered the fragile calm to pieces. Your eyes met those of a child watching from behind a cracked paper door, wide with questions that would remain unasked. The quiet innocence that once lived there had been folded away, pressed beneath the daily grind and this gathering storm. You swallowed hard, the knot in your throat tightening like the rope that lowered your bucket at dawn. A sudden, sharp crack tore through the air, a snapped branch on the village's edge. The enemy turned in unison, a ripple of movement taut as a drawn bowstring. The woman raised her staff again, her voice breaking the silence with a single word, steady and resolute. "Stand!" Around you the small voices rose, weaving a fragile chorus from the collected courage of those gathered. The sickle felt alive in your hand, a hum of readiness pulsing through your veins. Somewhere behind you, the elder's breath steadied, a slow exhalation that seemed to release some of the suffocating weight. The mist wavered, thinning just enough to catch the tentative flicker of sunlight breaking through a patch in the clouds. It spilled over the village in cold beams, highlighting the weariness etched into every face, the weathered wood of ancient homes and the swaying green that clung stubbornly to the fields. The stranger's eyes narrowed, reflecting that faint glow before he turned, nodding sharply to his soldiers. They advanced then, boots sinking into soft earth, slicing through the fragile silence with ruthless certainty. The air brimmed with the scent of impending conflict, a bitter mix of rain-soaked soil and the sharp tang of blood yet to be shed. But before the first blow was struck, a figure slipped from the gathering shadows at the village's edge, cloaked in muted grays that blended seamlessly with the mist. They moved without sound, a ghost weaving between the lines of fate and fear. Your breath hitched as your eyes locked with theirs, familiar, chilling, and impossible to forget. Time seemed to fold inward, the atmosphere, charged with a silent recognition that echoed louder than any war cry, the whispered warning carried by the wind, soft, cold, certain, wrapped around your heart like a thin blade. You were not meant to survive this day. The village held frozen, caught within the fragile web of the past and the looming storm, waiting for the first crack to shatter the dawn. The whispered warning hung in the sharp morning air, a chill curling round the village like the last breath of a dying fire. And yet within you stirred not just fear, but something quieter, a steady pulse beating beneath the worn skin of aged hands, a fragile spark refusing to be snuffed. The stranger soldiers advanced through the thinning mist, heavy steps folding into the earth with relentless certainty. Behind them, the broken banner fluttered faintly, a ghost of old promises and lost glories. But here, pressed against the bitter cold and raw edges of survival, the village stood anchored in one unyielding truth. It was not yet finished. The elder stepped forward, his voice steady as weathered stone, carrying the weight of winters etched into his worn face. "No more silence," he said, not as a challenge, but as a quiet vow. The woman with the cracked staff nodded beside you, her grip tightening into strength, her eyes bright embers in the gray dawn. You swallowed the knot, twisting deep in your throat. The sickle in your hand felt heavy, but not with doom, with purpose. The field beyond the village, tangled with pale and wilting rice stalks, seemed to lean into the moment, the earth holding its breath alongside you. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the soft rustle of bamboo, shaken by a cold, steady wind. Children peered from behind fragility, thin paper walls that barely held back unseen fears. Their wide eyes, mirrors reflecting the tension threading through the village's chest. The stranger's voice cut through the silence again, sharp and low, carrying the weight of years buried beneath dust and blood. We have come to claim what was promised long ago. The words rolled over the soil, mixing with the metallic tang of armor and smoke. And just as the first clash seemed inevitable, the village breathed in as one, a slow, collective breath that wove hope into the fabric of fear. The woman lifted her staff, steady and sure, the cracked wood catching the faintest sigh of light. Her voice broke the morning stillness, a soft word, simple and resolute. Stand. Pitchforks, stones, sickles, tools of daily toils, now transformed by quiet courage, gripped by neighbors whose faces told stories of pain, endurance, and now defiance. The elder's gaze swept the crowd, offering no false promises, only this unshakable truth. Together, they had survived worse. From the shadows at the edge of the village, a figure stepped forward silently, cloaked in muted grays that blended with the lingering mist. They moved with the half-heard and long-buried unfurled, a tale of loss, redemption, and the stubborn resilience thrumming beneath the soft decay of the village's fragile quiet. They spoke no words, but the air around you shifted, a silent promise pulsing beneath the stillness. The enemy halted, the sharp edge of that silent claim cutting through the tense pause like a blade. The village held fast, a heartbeat caught in the fragile balance of past and future. Then the first slivers of sunlight pierced the gray veil, pale arms reaching in gentle fingers through the mist. They spilled over the crowd, lighting faces worn by hardship and hope, illuminating the crooked wood of ancient homes and the muted green of rice shoots fighting for life in battered earth. The strange figure moved to your side, their presence an anchor for the swirling storm within. Without a word, they handed you a small, weathered scroll, edges frayed, seals cracked and faded, but holding the weight of unbroken promise. Unfurling it carefully, you traced the worn characters, a record of past debts and debts repaid, old alliances rekindled, ancient wounds acknowledged. The struggle was not ended, but transformed, a new beginning carved from the ashes of silence. Behind you, the elder's voice rose once more, a quiet benediction upon the day. We endure, we stand, we carry what remains forward. The village, for the first time that dawn, seemed to breathe not out of fear, but with a measured, steady resilience. Neighbors exchanged glances, softened by the smallest, rarest smiles. The children's eyes held wary light. A fragile promise tucked within the folds of a hard-won peace. Outside the village boundaries, the invaders hesitated, shadows retreating like a tide pulled back by unseen hands. The broken banner drifted softly to the ground, its fall marking not defeat, but the closing of one chapter and the slow birth of another. You turned back toward the fields, where the pale green rice swayed gently in a freshening breeze. The earth, cold but yielding, beneath your fingers, held the scent of rain and earth, the promise of growth beyond loss. The sickle in your hand felt lighter now, like a tool reborn, not just for harvest, but for tending fragile hope. The sun climbed steadily higher, casting long, warm fingers across the village's weathered roofs. The mist thinned to a delicate veil, retreating like a reluctant dream. Breath steady, heart quiet but full, you knelt by the edge of the field and pressed your palms against the earth, feeling the pulse of a cycle turning once more. The day stretched ahead, uncertain but alive, its weight no longer a shackle, but a path forward. The village gathered slowly, voices weaving a soft, steady murmur, stories exchanged in the gentle glow of morning, laughter rising like tentative song through the now warming air. Together, they moved to clear the fallen wood, to repair what could be saved, to rebuild what once was thought lost. Night would come again, as all nights do, bringing rest and quiet, but it would find the village stronger, fragile, yes, but unbowed. The cold weight of dawn had passed, leaving in its place not silence, but a soft, enduring calm. You rose slowly, shoulders easing, eyes tracing the horizon where sky met earth in an endless, forgiving line. The fierce breath of survival settled into a gentle rhythm, a lullaby carried on the wind and whispered into the bones of the land. And as you stepped back toward the home you had fought to protect, the day's first true warmth brushed your face, a quiet benediction, a soft promise that even after the darkest storms, dawn returns. Your breath mingled with the morning air, lighter now as you let the tension ease. The village, your people, the fields, all held together by the fragile, stubborn thread of hope. Tonight, the silence would finally be gentle, and you could rest